Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining us all across this lovely blue marble that we call our planet. Welcome to Creation Conversations. I'm filling in temporarily for Joe, who's just had to step out for a second, but we do have our international director, John Mackay. We have Dr. Diane Eager. We have Dr. Glenn Wilson. We have me, your
Yes.
fabulous tech guy, Sam Jenkins. And also we do have Joe, but he's just in the background. Otherwise engaged. But let's say hello. How are we all doing today?
Well,
Doing
we're
great.
doing okay here in Australia, and Craig is halfway across Tasmania today with a group going to a fabulous gem show and all of that sort of thing. So he, like Joe, well, he won't be back today, but he's got some stuff that we've already got lined up to show you. And Joe, of course, is just about finished his phone call, so he'll be back in a moment. So we're doing well down under, and praise the Lord, it's raining here.
Ah, fabulous news for the desert barren land of Australia. But Diane, you're still in the UK, aren't you?
Yes, I am still in the UK. Yes, and
Good.
it rained here too, but then that's not news in the UK.
No, that's not news. No, that's basically every day. That's
Yes.
just
Mm.
practically every weekday here. Glenn, how are you doing all the way over in a good old God bless the USA land?
Doing great. We usually get a lot of rain here. We were supposed to get a big front and big rain, and I think we got 2 drops. I'm kind of disappointed. It hadn't rained really in a month. So,
Yes,
Well-
the weather prophets wouldn't pass God's test, would they?
No. It's not exactly an exact science weather forecasting currently in these day and ages. You go out hoping to see rain, and you take a brolly with you, and it's just bright sunshine, and it's too hot, and you don't know where to put your umbrella. Anyway, so we've got a fabulous show for you today. We've got a Q&A special, so make sure you get all of your questions in the chat. We'll be dealing with some questions from previous live streams, as we do promise every single week. We do save your questions, and we do come to them if we can during a question and answer session, which is this week. But we have oodles and oodles of questions, so we can literally pick and choose what we want. But I believe first we're going to John for a little bit of a ministry update.
No, you've forgotten one thing, Sam, because you've been burdened with this on the spot by Joe. You've got a black hole to fill in.
Oh,
Or a
yes.
Big Bang.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, did you know, guys, there was a second Big Bang? We missed it. Who'd have thought?
Oh,
Anyway, so I was doing some shopping the other day. I had a look through the magazine section, and I came across the famous magazine New Scientist, and plastered all over the front there was a second Big Bang. And so I had a look inside, and there was a quote that stood out to me, which I thought was very interesting. So I'll just put that up on the screen there for you. We think that dark matter exists because it solves several astronomical headaches. Spot the problem with that sentence. But yeah, so this is taken from the latest edition of New Scientist, November 2023. It's the headline article where it discusses the origins of dark matter and proposing that there was a second Big Bang after the first Big Bang that produced dark matter and all the matter that we see in the universe, that created stars, cats, dogs, light, electricity, everything. So, I mean, I sent the article over to you guys. What were your thoughts?
Well, it reminds me of so much we do in science where you have a problem, you hypothesize an answer, your answer makes sense to you. It then becomes more than a theory in the textbooks, and in the minds of the public, it's a fact, right? And these factoid imaginary answers then get so embedded in science, they're used as a framework for stepping off to other things. When you trace them back, like climate change, I mean, I always remember the guy in India who suggested that the glaciers were melting, and then he's quoted and quoted and quoted till it becomes absolute fact. And then when you try and trace it back, there's one man there who hasn't proved anything. So this is so common in science. because science has ceased to be a pursuit of truth, but a pursuit of acceptable theories.
Yeah. I remember in graduate school, my major professor teaching me how to use a computer to write, because that was new at the time, would give me a writing assignments. And one of them was on a white paper on a ruling theorem. And that's what so much in science is. You have a ruling theorem. No matter whatever you propose, it has to fit into that theorem. And that's what this reminds me of. We know the Big Bang is true. Therefore, we, even if it's got problems, we can solve it by making up these conceptual ideas. And so those conceptual ideas must be true, because the ruling theorem is the Big Bang is true, no matter what the science says, it shows.
Exactly. Well, I mean, what sort of stood out with me with that comment specifically when I read it was just, well, it's pretty much the secular version of God of the gaps, really, of trying to find something, basically saying, well, we know it was the Big Bang, but we don't know how things happen. So there must have been a second Big Bang, which is how we explain things, and that's how we know dark matter exists, but we haven't found it, and it's all sort of it's all over the place, basically. And I just saw that quote and I thought, I weep for humanity. But I mean, it's definitely it's an interesting read. So if you do want to have a look at the article for yourself and see exactly what they are spouting nowadays as proper science, then just go out and have a look at New Scientist, and you can see exactly where the holes are in the theory. But anyway, so shall we do your ministry update? Unless, Diane, you want to add anything?
No, I think we've said enough about black holes or
Okay, well,
dark matter, which is stuff that can't be seen. So how about we get on to some things we can see?
all right. I will sort of head to my section here and come on up. There we are. Am I on screen, Sam?
Well, Joe is now on screen. There we go. And he's also on mute. But never mind. We'll
there we are. Happy days. Is that better? Good. Sorry, yes, I was taking on a very important phone call that came through just as we were about to start. So thank you for holding the fort,
It's
Sam.
my pleasure. But
okay, so do you want to bring my screen up, Sam?
Yeah, you're all on the screen. You're ready to go.
All right, ready to go. Okay, so give me the whole screen, because there's our normal sort of introductory PowerPoint that Joe and I began to use when he first came to Australia. Pre-COVID seems so long ago. But in reality, we did a lot of field work out here. And I was asked yesterday by a group at Jurassic Ark, when you're coming again, Joe? So I said, we'd love to have him, but you'd better fork out the money for the for the airfares. But anyway, in between time, I've still been doing some field trips. Here's Australia. This is a couple of weeks ago when my wife and I just took 5 days off, and we went to visit some friends, one of the ladies who used to work for us. And this is sort of an hour and a half drive from their house. As you can see, the world is overcrowded. We are in Australia near the town of 1770. Now, 1770 is a little settlement basically named after Captain Cook's arrival on the coast there. Beautiful coastline, rugged coastline. My friend is the only person I met all along this section. You can see the bush tracks are not actually tourist quality. It's just a walking track, and you soon run into lots of rocks. Now, why are we there? We're there because 30 years ago, I led a field trip along here. Just a couple of us then, just a couple of us now, because it's too rugged for most people to come. The first sort of rock you run into is not only got layers in, it's got bits and pieces of rocks with layers in. And these are largely volcanic rocks. Now, I knew what to expect because I'd been here before, but if you've never had to walk over volcanic rocks, many of these are jagged, and they'll tear your, if you just got ordinary tennis shoes on or whatever, they'll tear them to pieces. But you can see the big lumps. This has been blasted and then resealed together as the hot ash in between has re-welded everything. And then on the beach, between these rocks, you've had the volcanic rocks have eroded out, then they've re-cemented together for a third time. You see, there's some of the big rocks, and can you see right in the middle of the picture, there's what looks like a dark line? Now, this is a modern rock that's forming. We call them beach rocks. And if you want to know what the angle of the beach is doing, it tells you a little bit about the history. You can see where it looks like there's been a chop along here. Well, a big rock has been eroded out of that, but the little rocks side by side have fallen down in the sand and been re-cemented together. So we've had layers, we've had volcanic rocks, we've had beach rock forming in the present tense. Now, people find it hard to believe that you can actually make rock, and it can make rock on beaches present tense. It doesn't take time. It takes the presence of a good cement to glue the rocks together. Again, notice the overcrowding. But the one thing that had happened since I was up here 30 years, well, two things that happened since I was up here 30 years ago, but the first of it meant that we had to do this the hard way, because given the bushfire season, given all the concern that people are having in our drought, we could not get in the original way, which made it fairly easy 30 years ago. So we had to do it the tough way. So we get up to this gap, and on the other side, there's a lot of erosion. So it's back and round. Oh, look at the crowds. Just amazing. There's about as many people here as there was when Captain Cook sailed past in 1770. And the trouble is, the second thing I found is I'm 30 years older, and we had to climb the cliffs, fingertip holes, tiny little boot holes. Yep, it was climbable 30 years ago. And 30 years later, I'm learning that age does not actually improve your mountain climbing skills. We had to ascend over here. You can see that rocks have all been weathered. They've fallen down. This is all volcanic rock here along the front. So we've got a Graham Creek Volcanics. It's named like sedimentary layers from where it was first observed. And see, some of the people have finally showed up on the scene right down there. That's how high we had to climb up. And I'll tell you what, my legs were beginning to tell me that I had gained 30 years in time and space. And there's the top of the cliff, and there's the beach we have to get to. If only the fireys had left the tracks open, we could have done this a whole lot easier, but still a tough climb. You see, that was steep, going down and going up. Why were we there? Because 30 years ago, I found these. Can you see the fossil tree? Can you see the tiny fossils? Can you notice that the pieces may be broken, but along the edges, they're fairly straight? There's all sorts of trees and ferns in here. And the reason I wanted to take my friend there was that he wasn't a geologist. He'd sort of been to Jurassic Ark, and he loved the fossils, but he didn't know there were any around where he lived. Well, in Australia, where he lived, I see we're an hour and a half's drive from where he lived. But that's local to us Aussies because it's such a big place. See the main stem? See the stems coming off the side? There's all sorts of plants here, big ones, little ones. Again, you can notice that everything seems to be, well, let's take you a bit close up. There's gazillions of fossils. I'll be honest, my friend, after an hour and a half really of driving, followed by 2.5 hours of climbing over cliffs and down mountainsides, was beginning to say, there's no fossils here. And then we could stop and point them out to him. Now, can you see there's an overall pattern to the fossils? They're sort of pointing from the top of the screen to the bottom in a rough wash. I mean, like when you see stems washing down a stream in a flood, there's a general overall pattern, even though they may be crunched up and bumping into one another. And I'm sitting back here by the edge of this cliff that we had to climb down. No tourist stairways. We'd climbed over that cliff behind and then down on the cliff on the left-hand side. And now we're down on the beach, which is, as you can see, undercrowded. So come to Australia. We need your tourist dollars to help us support the place. But look, some of the trees are polystrate. And I noticed there's a few questions about polystrate trees coming up on the Q&A. That's one that's standing vertically. There's one that's standing at a 45-degree angle. Then the question that came up was, do these have tree rings? Well, we can answer that in a moment, but you keep your eyes open. And there's my friend's tennis shoes. He was almost regretting he'd worn tennis shoes. They've got good rubber holes on, but I tell you what, the volcanic ash, the volcanic lava, the volcanic sharpness begins to tear these to pieces. Single-use tennis shoes almost. Do you spot the edge of the logs here, by the way? Notice that though they're broken off from either end, the edge of the logs is actually nice and straight. Look at this size one. See on my right-hand side where I'm leaning on the rock? Or I'm pointing the angle at, my left hand there. That I'm pointing north to show you that these trees are actually lying almost just under east and just north of west. Take you closer. Here's a tree that's been squashed. Here's a tree that's got sand inside it, but it's squashed. Here's a tree that in its life would have been a hollow giant reed type tree. Now, we don't have those at Jurassic Ark. We have a couple of mysterious trees, but all of these trees here are in actually good shape, except where they've been broken off. This tree has got bark on it, and then there's an inside pattern, and then there's a sandy bed underneath it. So for those of you who are asking questions about polystrate trees, this is not a polystrate tree, but neither does it have any tree rings because it's a hollow type tree. Well, all good things come to an end. We'd reached sort of 2 p.m. in the afternoon, so we had to begin to head back because we had to build in the time it took us to get there and to get back out. Tell you what a walk, what good exercise. Well, we are abundantly prepared in creation research for one simple reason. We don't just read books by creationists. We don't just sort of buy fossils for our museums. We actually go and collect these things. The reason I've been really interested in this deposit, even though it's 30 years since I've been there, one of my old university tutors actually wrote the book on this whole region of the volcanics and things like that. And even he noticed some of the fossils and how well preserved they were. And his guess was that they were an extension of the Jurassic beds that we have at Jurassic Ark. Now, we are driving time, we are basically 5 hours from Jurassic Ark. So if he's right, then we have a huge area of fossil trees. But I've mentioned that before. The fossil tree beds in Australia cover, well, the exposed area of them in Queensland alone is basically 170,000 square kilometres. Unbelievable. Yeah, you heard me right. England is a puny little place. And if you took America and the United States, Australia actually fits over the United States. So it's about the same size. And if you're listening to the sizes, then we have incredible volumes of the material that we have at Jurassic Ark for just checking. Trees that are ripped up, trees that are not worn on the sides, they may be broken at either end, trees that are vertical, and well, you can still ask a question about rings. We'll come back to that one. But those of you who are Aussies, who are taking advantage of our daylight saving in Tasmania, where it's already 8 o'clock, or you're watching here in Queensland, where it's 7 o'clock, if you want to pay for the cost of new tennis shoes or climbing boots or wear and tear on human bodies, or the cost of running our museums and all of this, then there are ways you can do that. And I'm not apologizing for asking. We do need your support. So use the simple ways like Bank Pay ID or go to our main web and look it up. Okay, Sam, you can put me back on hold there while I just come out of here. And there we are. Right. I should be back. That's correct, Sam?
You are back in the room.
Great.
Good stuff. All right. Well, obviously, as I'm sure Sam has explained, and I wasn't here, we're doing Q&A predominantly tonight. We've actually got reports from Sam and from Glenn to come, and we will sort of intersperse them in between questions and answers. So, Sam, it is over to you. It is your time to shine and dive into the questions. Before we go into some of the live questions, and we will get to some of the live questions, but why don't we have one of the questions from a previous stream? And just to remind everybody, while Sam put this up, we do not get the chance to answer every single question every single stream. So we do keep a record of all of the questions, and that's part of the reason why we have these Q&A specials every 6 weeks or so, is to give us all an opportunity to get your questions, previous questions, answered. So it's a little trip down memory lane, going back down some of the questions for the topics that we've had previously. So Sam, over to you.
All right. Well, this first question comes into us from our good friend Ravi, who asked this question. He asked, question, why is it that there are no secular converts to creationism? If the evidence was so strong, you'd think it would be widespread.
Well, I'll come into that one first. In reality, Ravi, that's an innocently ignorant statement, because one of the guys who I know has rejected evolutionism has done so because he could see the moral implications on his kids, and he even wrote a book on the evidence for rejecting evolution. And the one reason he didn't want to swap over to creation was not simply that there was no evidence. He would have been the first to admit that the evidence was really pointing in that direction. But his statement to me was that he really did not want a God who was going to be over him. So he could see the evidence of creation. He wanted to retain his autonomy as an independent person. He did not want somebody higher than him, but neither could he accept evolution, because he could see the moral decadence that came to society because of evolution. And we don't need to go there at the moment, but you are quite wrong. There's an awful lot of people who are secularists. In fact, my experience in university, and Glenn, you might want to comment on this, is that there are very few vocal evolutionists at the top. There are an awful lot of scientists who don't have an opinion because it would hinder their career, etc. And then there's quite a lot, like the scientists I was talking about, who actually can see the evidence of creation, actually admit that it's logical and convincing, but they have a moral or philosophical reason for not wanting to go there. Glenn, have you got any comments?
Just the majority of the scientists that I know, they accept evolution as true because they've never given it any thought. It really doesn't pertain to most areas of science. It doesn't pertain to my area of science. So they just assume, well, it must be true because I was told it was true, and I was taught that since I was a little kid. But they've never looked into, well, what is the evidence for evolution, or what is the evidence for creation? And many of the ones that I know would consider themselves Christians. They go to church, but they never even give it any thought about creation or evolution. It doesn't impact them, doesn't affect them. But I took the question as, why are there no converts? And yet you just heard from one. John, I've heard you tell us before that you were an atheist, and now you're one of the founders of the modern creation movement.
Same here. Well, I'm not the founder of the modern creationist movement, but I was an atheist, and a very sort of vehement one at that, before I converted to, obviously, came and saw the light, and thanks to John as well, all those years ago.
Just one comment. Back on the word atheist, I just didn't believe in a God who was over me, right? So the slight difference there. Basically, it was the university evidence against evolution that our professors kept talking about that pushed me in the direction of creation. So I had a good comment there, Glenn. Having looked at Johnson and many of the others who are well known, as convert, you need to modify your statement.
Yes, there are quite a few scientists who reject evolution but don't want to embrace creation because they understand that if you embrace creation, that means there has to be a creator. And that's what they're really running away from. They're not running away from the whole idea of design or evidence for creation. They're running away from the possibility of a creator. But there are quite a number who actually reject evolution.
All right, very good. Let's have another question, Sam. Maybe a live one that's come through tonight. If there is.
All right, we'll do a live one. Why not? But we'll give thanks first to Douglas Boffey, who's come in with 20 British Buckaroos. Decided not to use the same super sticker as last week, for which I'm truly grateful, Douglas. Thank you. I don't want to be a pile of poo this week. Thank you. But let's do a question. This is coming from Facebook from David Cruz. David asks, since there was no rain nor seasons before the flood, do polystrate trees have growth rings, i.e. the petrified wood from Noah's Ark?
Okay, as the polystrate man, hopefully when I die I won't become polystrate, but if they want to bury me vertically, it'll cost them more money. The hole needs to be a little deeper than just the ordinary 2 meters to stop the dogs digging me up. Interesting fact of little burial procedure there. So when you have a look at the polystrate trees, let's take the ones in the UK, because both Joe and I have seen those. So take the one that became famous that we feature at our Jurassic Ark, and that's the Manchester polystrate tree that is really the one that brought the word flood geology back into cognizance. If you get the geology of Manchester, which I think is out of print now, you get Professor Broadmoor and some of the others who actually talk about one polystrate tree and the reason it puzzled them. And we've done programs on these, and I went and I showed you how I refound that tree, which had disappeared for quite a while, and re-excavated and cleaned it all up. It was covered in moss and virtually invisible. They were talking about the number of layers beside this tree, and the reason it was famous was that you find so many heaps and heaps and heaps of layers, you know, the strata beside it, and there'd be the sea deposits, land deposits. It would be barren. And the professor's argument was, well, if this was really the case, if the fossil layer was laid down in the sea, the tree had to be below the sea level. If it was fresh water, it had to come back up. If it was terrestrial, it had to sink around or rise further. And he said, this is impossible. This tree is not even bent. So basically, this has been washed into place. The tree is standing up. It's a flood deposit. And that was the introduction of the word in secular geology, even though we creationists had continually used it from Noah's flood and the book, etc. Now, when you look at most of the polystrate trees in the UK coal deposits, the question of tree rings is interesting. But when you excavate them, I've collected whole cross sections, and you'll find these ones are devoid of rings by and large. For one simple reason, they belong to a family of plants which don't have rings anyway. So when you look at the equisetum type plants, or you look at the reed type plants, you learn one thing. In days of yore, these plants were enormous. The equivalent plants today may be 18 inches, half a meter tall on average. So that, Glenn, when you look at your equisetum plants, the horsetail rushes growing through Tennessee, they may be a meter tall. And yet in the rocks, I've seen them 100 feet or 30 meters tall, but they are hollow in the rocks and they fill in. And it creates all sorts of interesting arguments about how does the mud get inside them? Well, they're hollow, and I've got some fabulous fossils from inside these trees. There are animal fossils, there are amphibian fossils, there are all sorts of fossils that have actually been washed into the trees, but no tree rings. Remember I told you in that deposit that we so laboriously had to circuitously get 2.5 hours of travel just to get there and then back out again? That big squashed log, they cannot be polystrate going across many layers if they're being laid horizontally, because being hollow, the pressure will just squash them. If they are vertical, then they can be filled in, so they'll maintain their vertical structure, but they won't have tree rings. But then I showed you two, one that was the vertical section and one that was at 45 degrees. Now, they are woody trees and mostly pine trees in the pine family. And in the present world, the southern conifers, the Araucarias, have rings, and they have them in the fossil tree record as well. Now, the next bit of the question is assumptive. So you ask, since trees today have rings, and you skip the next little bit, there were no seasons before the flood, so do they have rings? Here is an assumption that tree rings represent growth seasons only. Now, one of the things we've noticed, there's a whole batch of trees that will grow seasonally, yet they have no rings. One reason is because the inside rots out. Come with me for a walk along the coast, and I'll show you vast numbers of trees that have flowers and seeds, and yet the inside disappears because of the presence of the rotting effect of seawater, and all of the mangroves don't have any insides. So you preserve those, they won't have any tree rings at all, even though they grew seasonally. Secondly, you'll find if you come with me to the Northern Territory, where growth is determined by the amount of water, and sometimes you don't have any growth because we have a drought. I've seen drought-affected trees, 5 years no rain, 7 years no rain, 10 years no rain, and there's no tree rings. And then you have 3 batches of rain in 1 year, and you get 3 growth rings. But therefore you learn one thing: growth is not determined by seasons, it's determined by the favorable patterns to growth. And then there's the third one, and I wish Craig was here to comment on this. One of the things we've noticed is that trees like you and me need a rest. Yep. Yeah, I'm in that, and Diane comment on that with Bill, if you like. Many of the trees will get to a point where they just stop growing and take a break, regardless of the climate out there. So those tree rings match rest periods, not the seasons that you see outside. So all of those would indicate that you would get regular rings even before the flood, but they would not be tied to the seasonal rings like you see in the trees in Alaska or in England or wherever. Glenn or Joe, you got any comments?
Yes, that's tremendous what you just taught the audience, and I wish you had taught me that the first time that we went to see the polystrate trees in Tennessee, because after we left, I went back and collected a big stump from the inside of one of those, and I took it to my rock saw and cut it, and I couldn't find any rings or any evidence of any wood tissue. And then, it was a couple of years later, I started getting involved with you in creation research, and I learned that those were calamites. Those were vascular hollow plants. But I didn't know that from the first time we went out. So I wish I'd have heard this talk 4 years ago.
Did you get any good fossils in that cross section, plants and things like that?
No, because I was cutting in thin sections, and I cut a couple of them and just said, okay, something's not right. This doesn't make sense. There's no evidence of any wood tissue inside what I thought was a petrified tree.
Internal cast of the lycopods, yeah. It's a similar ones to you get up at where if you look back on the road trip which I did to Northumberland, you can actually see as it's eroding out, you've got this lovely shell of a sort of a bark, and then the inside's just hollow infill. So, no, good question. All right, right, let's have another question, Sam.
All right then, and because I really like this question, Joe may want to shed some light about this, because I know that he's very interested in this field. Sandy C asks, question for the panel: according to evolutionists, iron in dinosaur bodies preserved soft tissue before it could decay. Are they correct?
Okay, I'll comment and I'll let the rest of the team comment then. The argument that this is being used here stems from the original discoveries of soft tissue, or what we call original biomolecules inside dinosaur bones. Now, the first ones to be discovered were sort of red, squidgy stuff. Predominantly blood cells, and then later in 2005, Mary Schweitzer found entire bits of red blood cells and soft tissue inside dinosaur bones. And these are from a deposit in the USA, very well-known deposit, Cretaceous, and there is a lot of iron in this deposit. And the argument was very simple. Well, red blood cells contain a lot of iron. It's what carries the oxygen around, is what turns them red, right? Therefore, if these fossils are buried in a high iron sediment, then that iron in the sediment will preserve the soft tissue. That was the argument. There's a lot of problems with it, because even iron inside it doesn't preserve something which has a half-life of only 2,000 to 3,000 years for millions of years. But and there's never been any example that have been used that could possibly extend the life of these original biomolecules to anything more than 1 million years. The bigger problem has come, however, that a lot more soft squidgy stuff has been found since those original Schweitzer discoveries. Right, so there are now over 200 papers. These are secular academic papers that have been published in the scientific literature detailing the presence of original biomolecules. So, quick distinction, because there's confusion within the scientific literature between what the term soft tissue means. Because if you go to the Natural History Museum, you can see some beautiful soft tissue preserved in the ichthyosaur fossils there. But this soft tissue refers to the imprints of the skin, right? That is soft tissue, and it's been preserved, but it's not in the original state. It's an impression in the rock. When we talk about soft tissue, more commonly in relation to these dinosaur stuff, we're talking about soft squidgy stuff that was inside the dinosaur while it was alive, that has been preserved, entrapped in minerals, and is still present today. And like I say, it's gone way beyond just the red blood cells. We're now dealing with nerve cells. We're dealing with sometimes entire sort of tissue structures, biological structures, lots of collagen, which is a protein and is completely separate from red blood cells. So we've kind of expanded well outside of just the red blood cells. So really, the iron argument does not work for any of these other pieces of soft tissue or original biomolecule that's been there. So the biggest critic of any soft tissue work, by the way, is a guy called Michael Buckley, who I'm very well aware of. He's based at Manchester University. You can look him up on Google Scholar. He's actually written multiple critiques on collagen discoveries inside dinosaur bones. He's an ancient collagen expert, and his entire argument essentially against these soft tissue researchers that are finding stuff in dinosaur bones is that, given what we know about collagen, so the exact quote is, there is less than 1% chance of finding less than 1% collagen in less than 1 million years. Right? In other words, by the time you get to 1 million years, there'll be no collagen left whatsoever. Personally, I think that is actually a little high, the 1 million years. If you look at some of the medical literature, which talks about the half-life of collagen, you're looking at about 400 to 500 years. So that would only put it to a few thousand years before all your collagen is gone. But even if you want to go to 1 million years, I'm still very happy to support that figure, because, of course, the whole point that we're trying to make with these soft tissue discoveries is that there's no way the bones could be that old. Any other comments, guys?
No, I think you've covered it well, Joe.
Yes.
Good answer. Good answer. Right. Do you want to do another question? Do you want
just to
Sure. Yeah,
more, and then we'll
one
go
more.
to go to Diane's report and Glenn's.
All right, cool beans.
Yeah.
Okay, so this question has come in. This is sort of a two-part question, really, coming from Gary Zench. So the first part of the question, he's asked, for you and everyone, are you for Israel, the one established by Christian Zionism and Jewish Zionism? And the second part, which he went on to, was, should we have concord with sons of Belial, those who don't believe the Lord? And has been quoting a lot of Bible verses in the chat, quoting about World Vision money going to Palestinian terrorism and things like that. should we still have concord with the Palestinians if that's the case? There's a whole can of worms with this one, but
yeah. If I can just throw open one thing quickly, and then I'll let John and anybody else comment. I think the best advice to Israel and to anyone who is Jewish is probably the advice that a fellow Jew gave them in Acts chapter 2, because Peter said to them after they asked, "What shall we do? Repent and let every one of you be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit." So that was Peter's advice to the Jews, to the descendants of Israel. Later you'll find a very similar statement that Paul made to the Gentiles. Those are the non-Jews. So in other words, everybody, Jewish or not, has been called to repent and follow Jesus Christ. Right? That's the first and foremost foundation before we even touch the politics of any of this. What you'll also find is there's some very interesting prophecies about the Israel as a nation as well as a people. So it's worth bearing those in mind, that God will have his way, and it's not our place to get in the way of that. But ultimately, it has to come back to the gospel, regardless of who you are. John?
It's the same situation that the scripture talks about when it talks about why is there war and fighting amongst you, meaning the Christians in the church in the early days. And basically, the answer that you get is it's because of sin, right? You summarize it down. Even the Christians will be afflicted by this problem of sin. So if you want to deal with Jews, Arabs, etc., the real issue is not the politics of Joe Biden versus Mr. Albanese going to China or whatever, or what happens to your money you give to World Vision. You'll be amazed at how cleverly God will judge the little old widow who innocently gives money to a corporation who then illegally or wrongfully uses it for purposes it was not given. God has a much better judgment system than we do. But you see, what it means is when we judge things, we often see the point of view, well, I want the war to stop. Well, great. So does everybody in the Middle East, really, except for those who want it to keep going, which is sadly a lot of leadership over there. Now, you've got to put it in perspective. The real issue is not politics. The real problem with politics is sin. The real solution to sin is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So keep that in mind with all of your discussions as you get sidetracked into left-wing politics, right-wing politics, Christians on this side or Christians on that side. The real need of an Arab Palestinian, the real need of someone who is pro-Hamas or anti-Hamas or whatever, is they need Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Because if you don't start there, then think of what you get. You see, a friend of mine who was Jewish actually left the USA and went and lived in Israel, come back a really disappointed person. He said they are not Israel, they're living outside the law. They have the biggest abortion rate, etc., etc., etc. He was absolutely horrified and immediately became non-Israel. Okay, what he needed to do was go back to Israel and preach the gospel, which would make him fairly unpopular with many of his relatives, but just like it did with Jesus or with the New Testament apostles. Otherwise, here's the result. Regardless of how much peace you might bring in Israel or Palestine, or how much chaos you may cause with your politics, the people who are listening to you, they are shooting each other, they are bombing each other, so let's stop. They blow up 100,000 people in Gaza, they kill 10,000 people in Israel, and all of a sudden, in hell, you have absolutely furious Israelis chasing Arabs, never being able to stop the problem, or you have mad as one thing, Hamas people who are still trying to get their own back on the Jews with no possible solution. You actually need Jesus Christ to bring the peace. And if you want to bring peace to Israel and pray, let the peace come upon Jerusalem, then the only peace is the Prince of Peace. You know, God is with us. That's what you need. And that must be your overriding factor. It gets people mad at me because I say you're dealing with an issue which is really 3 down the line. You won't solve that one until you actually get these people one with God, who is Jesus Christ. And of course, you may start another war by preaching that. So be really, really wary. Glenn, have you got any comments?
No. Just, I guess my question is, by concord, do you mean are we to live in peace? I think as the Bible teaches, as much as it's within our abilities, we should live in peace with others. If you mean by that, should we enter into some type of contract and some type of bond? No, the Bible, I think, is very clear that we're not to do that with non-believers, whether that's marriage or business that you're unequally yoked with. So it's a matter of, what you mean by it. But certainly as a Christian, I'm a supporter of Israel. My Heavenly Father, my Savior, is from Israel. And this is still God's people. And so I support them as best I can. Yeah, if that's the question.
All right, Sam, can I recommend we go to your report? Actually, I think it's Glenn's turn.
Well, no, let's do a quick, very brief comment from me and Diane, and then going over to Glenn's bit, because Diane, obviously, as you know, spent a week with us filming and doing stuff in the last little while. And then, Diane, what did we do on the way to your next destination?
We stopped by Birmingham and we went to the Sea Life Centre.
And we got a whole load of great photographs and footage, including that of a shark, which was reported on a few years back, which talked about being a vegetarian shark, and it was still there and still healthy looking.
Oh, very healthy. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll do a few reports about that coming up. But we've also just got this ammonite here, which I'll just open up for you to be able to see if we can get it right in the light so that it shows up. There we go. Lovely, great big ammonite, beautiful thing. Let's turn it around that way. There we go. Great big beautiful ammonite. This is actually one from the Himalayas, collected by the guy who actually went up to camp and collected it around there. So we've just had that acquired by the ministry, and that'll be going back to Australia with Diane to go to the Creation Discovery Centre in Brisbane, and we've actually got another one of these for ourselves here in the UK, so you can come and see a ammonite from the top of Mount Everest, which is fairly significant when it comes to flood geology. But anyway, we're going to go on to Glenn now, because Glenn, you've got a bit of a report and some videos to show, so over to you.
Well, just as a reminder, I think in the past we showed that when Joe was here, we went out to a site and collected some stuffed toys that we had put out 2.5 months before, little cotton stuffed animals that I keep calling it a stuffed teddy bear, but was a stuffed elephant. You want to show that?
I can indeed. Let me just pull that up for you. Here's the 3D scan of that fossil stuffed elephant.
All right. So in just 2.5 months, it had fully permeabilized and was hard, just like a rock. So we want to do that with some others so that we could use these for selling. And we went back out to the site, but I went to a little bit different location. And Joe and I had visited this site in June and walked up and down these streams. They're fairly steep. And at one point, Joe and I got out of the stream because it was just all green slime. Well, now it's been under a drought. It's very dry. All the streams pretty much are dried up, but yet this one's still flowing. So I'm going to show a video of us putting some more items out.
Mm-hmm. Here we are.
Ready? I'm the Dirt Dog Glenn Wilson, and if you remember previously, I came out with Indiana Joe, where we had a fossilized teddy bear from a spring that we had set out along the road. Well, I'm here today with the person who put us onto this location. This is Barbara Belk. Barbara Belk spotted this area where there was an unusual stream coming out of the mountainside, very high in minerals. But today, we're back out and we're going to set out a series of these. This is the first week in November, so that when Indiana Joe comes back in February, we can come up here and see if they have also fossilized. As you can see, there's a lot of vegetation. In this vegetation, all these leaves are very rapidly fossilizing as well. And this is because of the mineral-rich waters that are seeping out of the mountainside. Okay, I don't know if we need to show the other one, but I told the group on Tuesday when we went back out there, I don't know if you noticed, but the slime has been coated with the iron and it's already starting to harden, but not in all areas. And I was standing on that ledge and my feet hit some of the slime that was still slimy. Next thing I knew, I was falling over backwards and rolling down the mountainside. So a little bit dangerous out there, but we were able to put 36 of those out. And we're hoping when Joe comes back, we're going to have some new fossils to go and rescue.
Should be good. No, it's looking good. And
Joe,
yes,
you may remember the spring we found along the Bristol Channel there, just past the bridge, and which all of the, because it's much wetter in England and regularly wet, the actual moss had actually petrified, and we collected quite a few specimens. And, you know, it would have been unbelievably slippery if it had done what you had. But yes, we climbed up and we got specimens of petrified moss. But this is a fairly regular phenomena. The interesting problem is it's usually ignored because it's obvious it was moss last summer and now it's rock hard, petrified, preserved, permineralized, use whatever word you like, but it's the basis of fossilization in all of these, no matter how much anti-creation nonsense you read about permineralization having nothing to do with fossilization.
Yes. And so as you walk on that area, your feet are crunching on the leaves that have fossilized. And so that was why it was easy for me to overlook the slime that was just underneath.
Great stuff. Yeah. And by the way, we're planning another USA trip for me to come around with Glenn, which will be in February and March. So if you're watching in the USA, get in touch now. We're going to start contacting people and putting request forms out in the next couple of days. So do get in touch with Creation Research if you'd like to book ministry in your area or for your group or field trips and the like. So that'll be February and March next year. All right, let's have a couple more questions, Sam, before we then move on to your report.
All righty. Well, we'll do one from the past. Why not? We'll go back in time a little bit. This one's an interesting question. I did like this question, but it's a shame we couldn't get to it. This comes from Burbass or BR Bass 33, and BR Bass asks. Question: is it possible evil had to exist for God to judge it? So when God creates the new heaven/earth, he is justified to create heaven on earth.
I'm not sure there's logic there without more presuppositions. You're asking for a moral judgment about a purpose, and when you look at, say, courts of law, the hardest part of judging something is, why did the murderer kill somebody? You may have all the evidence he did kill somebody, but you may never find out why. As to why did God need to do this in order to do that? Sometimes God tells us, sometimes he doesn't. We do know that he had planned in advance, because when you look at, say, the theology, Christ was sacrificed before the foundation of the world. Now, since God is outside of time, you've got to look at that from his perspective. He's not hindered by the fact that, well, I've done this now, and we need it for 6,000 years on, right? But at the same time, you can see his anticipatory planning so that we have a total system, immune system, which technically works really well for disease, which didn't exist in the beginning. And Diane might want to comment on the pre-planning of that and why you'd need to do that, and why this is not an automatic plan, but a consequential result of sin coming in and bugs and us not doing what we should. So I'd suggest you need to go back and rethink your question as to separating the purposes of God as to why he needed to do anything, because God doesn't need to do anything at all that would satisfy our logic. That's a really humbling thought to put up with. But so many of us have asked that question, why am I doing this? And sometimes God will actually give an answer. Or why is the Lord enabling my husband to die when I face 30 years now without income? You may not know the answer to that in the beginning. You may never know it before you die. But then when you get to be with him, you'll actually see how clever his plan was to actually make you grow in grace and in faith. So, I mean, I had that happen with me because of the study path that God took me on. I always wanted to do science, but God kept sidetracking me after I'd become a Christian into university studies, into academic studies, into educational stuff and all of that. And my thought was, why on earth am I doing this, except the Lord has pushed me in this direction? Now, it's only sort of 20 years on when I started doing the debates that I could realize that I could give the same lecture to university professors as I gave to kindergartens, because I'd experienced all these different levels, and you could begin to understand that the academic may be brilliant. He has his PhD in the size of isometric calculations regarding helium atoms or something like that. He's an absolute primary school, elementary kid when it comes to biology. And that was the reason why God taught me that the hard way. And so a path I didn't want to go. So again, I challenge you, always go back and say, does God need to do anything? Well, he doesn't need to justify himself to you or I or anything. He's absolute righteousness. And therefore, you've got Abraham's statement, shall not the God of all the earth do right? It was a great statement when Abraham made it. It was a great finish to the movie, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, as well, by those chaplains. So keep that in mind. Anybody else got any comments?
I just think it sounds like a slightly confused question in terms of definitions as well, like the justified in creating heaven on earth and the like. Yeah. So I'd recommend go back and sort of get a bigger context, because it's a far greater plan than the popular Billy Graham style of, oh, you go to heaven where you die and that's where you end up and that's where you stay kind of thing. We are given a promise of a new heaven and a new earth, which has nothing to do with the current one, because it will have passed away completely, where we will be with Jesus, and we will be in our new body. So get the sort of the full big picture of the future, rather than just trying to ask questions which ultimately can't be answered unless they're answered by God himself. We may, or probably will never know, certainly on this side of life, the answers. So yeah, there seems to be just, I can't quite pinpoint what it is, but there's some confusion in terminology there as well.
All right. Do you want to do another historic question?
Yeah, let's go for another historic question before we move on. Yeah, go for it.
All right, then. This one comes in from our good friend, Doki Doki. Doki asks, question, can a Christian integrate geological aspects of the Gnostic Gospels, like mountains being fossil flesh and 3,000-foot giants?
No.
Well, that didn't take long, did it, Joe?
Yeah, there we go. That was a quick one.
Be wary of any kind of the Gnostic Gospels, because gospel is good news, and when you read the Gnostic Gospels, there's very limited good news in them. I've seen. So yeah, mountains being fossil flesh, 3,000-foot giants. It was interesting. We had somebody comment on the creation conversations that we did the week before last, in which we dealt with the biggest rocks in the world, and Glenn specifically dealt with the Devil's Tower. And there were still people claiming that the fact that it was a tree and that there was no natural explanation for it meant that there must have been enormous giants that had chopped it down, because there's no other explanation for it. And yeah, it's it's worrying, really. What you'll find is that the reason why things in Scripture fit so well with the real world is because it actually happens to be true. It claims to be true, and so we shouldn't be surprised when we find evidence for it. When you find comments in things like the Gnostic Gospels and other things, some of the Apocrypha as well, like the Book of Enoch, where they claim just ridiculous things which go beyond any reality of biology, go beyond any reality that we see in the world, and it just gets to the point of stupidity very quickly, like fossil flesh and 3,000-foot giants.
Yeah, didn't we do a whole program on the Book of Enoch, if I remember correctly?
We did a little while back, yeah, and we talked about some of the fake giants and the stuff, the CGI stuff and the Enoch stuff.
Sam, if you want to give them a reference to that soon after you've sort of done your segment, I believe you've got some things to share, Sam.
Sure.
Yeah, let's go on to yours. Sorry, go, Sam.
Yeah, well, I thought we'd do some thank yous first.
Of course.
Yes.
I think one of the thank yous we need to give is a question from George Bond, so we'll come on to that afterwards. But we've got a thank you to give out to Sandy C for 10 New Zealand Buckaroos, a pair character flying in the air with a red cape and a smile on his face. I don't have a cape, so just imagine it in your mind. But there we go. Right, okay. So I for once, I actually have a ministry update, as I said in our prayer meeting earlier on this week. So I've been a busy bee. Part of the reason why I've been a busy bee is, unfortunately, I lost my job last week on Monday, which is a big blow. But there we go. Ho hum. Keep on seeking the Lord with everything and all that jazz. So I've been putting my my brain to work and doing a few bits and pieces. One thing I have been working on, which I will just share with you on my screen here. If I just bring that up here, if I do this, and then if I do this, and then share, and then hide that, and then I can bring that up on the screen there like that. There we go. So this is a program called Topaz Video AI. So this uses artificial intelligence to upscale videos. And here we have a clip of, this is coming from Darwin's Evolution, one of our series. And so I've basically been playing around with this to see what we can do with it. And there's some really, really cool stuff you can do. So I'll just scrub through this for a second so you can see just exactly what it can do. So if here we go. This is a good section here. So if I do a side-by-side comparison, and then if I go into view and then go full screen preview, I can zoom in here and then drag it around. So on the left-hand side, you've got the original, and then on the right-hand side, we've got the AI enhanced version. So this is what it looks like on the DVD. Lovely jubbly. But if we zoom in, it gets a little bit pixelated. It gets a little bit, we can't really see a lot of details, a bit grainy. But through the magic of AI, we can swipe it across and look at that. Look how clear that becomes, how high definition, and how nice that looks compared to if I do a nice sort of swipey again. You can see the difference there. Look at that, adding in all the details there and makes the text a little bit crisper. And also one of my favorite things, if you look down here, look at the rock as well. Look how blurry that looks, and then how clear it becomes afterwards. How HD. But yeah, so that's sort of something I've been fiddling around with. So I'll stop sharing my screen with that one. And then I have also been working on something that is quite interesting. I think you guys would really like it. If I pull these up here, if I do this in here, and then if I do, if I go on to, where have they gone? Oh no, I've lost them. Oh no, I've lost them. So I'll just give me two. Oh, here we go.
Why don't we have another question, Sam, that we can discuss?
Well, I get the first option here. My question, Sam, is you started off there with a picture of me. Now, I'm wondering if you have AI that does a 3D model, because I'd like to pass myself through that program. I certainly need an upgrade, repixelating, etc. So keep that in mind with this program.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sure
I think
lots of funds.
Yeah, well, I think in that case, John, I think I'd probably point you to New Heavens and New Earth with our new bodies. That's probably going to be coming quicker than 3D images and the 3D body swaps.
Yes.
But you never know. You never know. It might be a generational leap in a year or two's time. So we'll put you first in line for that, John. So we'll go on to another question here. We'll do George. He's sent in a super chat for 20 Aussie buckaroos. So God bless you, George. Thank you very much. How can a non-believer reconcile a genome comprising a code that contains prescriptive information with decision-making algorithms that smacks of a forward-thinking and a forward planner?
Ask John Sandon, the geneticist who became a Christian through that sort of factual stuff. So, yes, you'll find that there are some honest researchers out there who come up with this, and their only conclusion is, if I was to build a model of something and included such forward planning, then it would be because my mind existed before this, the problem existed, and I applied my creative pre-existing mind to a problem and came up with a created solution. So, George, the answer is honesty is one factor. B, accurate observation is another. C, being willing to discard the evolutionary framework. Now, to be honest, in my own experience, by the time you finish 3 or 4 years of geology, and every paleontology lecturer has said, but you don't see this in the evidence. You don't see this in the fossils. And when the students ask, well, where is the evidence for evolution? And I still remember the professor saying, well, it's in genetics or it's in chemistry. That's one reason I went and did 3 years of organic chemistry and heard the organic chemistry professor say, well, the evidence is in genetics. So I went and did genetics and graduated in distinctions with genetics. And when I asked that professor, he said, we believe in evolution because the evidence is in geology. And I'd done geology. I thought, this is stupid, right? So all of them were relying on somebody else. So you have to be brave enough to step outside the current framework, the thing that Glenn talked about, the reigning paradigm. And I mean, Einstein was. That's why he became famous. You need to be willing to step outside the current framework, which is the lie of evolution, and you'll see the same results as you saw with John Sandon. Anybody else got any comments?
No.
I think it goes back to that very definition of what a design is. When you have something that the end properties as the end result as properties that do not come from the materials that it's made of, then it is designed, and a code has exactly that. Whether you're writing it down, whether you're modeling it out of clay, or whether you're putting together out of sugars and phosphates and carbon atoms, as it is in DNA, it's still an end product, a code, which does not come from the materials that it's made of. So any form of, without even going on to the aspects of it, things like it can duplicate itself and it can repair itself and so on and so forth. Just the fact that it's a code tells you that it's designed.
Sam, can I recommend, because there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat about Eli and his sons and Samuel. You want to bring up that question from the current program there?
Yeah, sure.
Because there's a point to be made that I can't see anybody making.
Is this the one about Belial or?
Yes, the sons of Belial.
All right, so we've got this is coming from Gary Gench, 2 Corinthians 6:15, and what concord hath Christ with Belial, or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? 2 Samuel 23:6. But the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands.
Okay, and the preceding bit deals with Eli, whose sons were regarded as the sons of Belial. So the point that's been missed so far in all of this, the scripture certainly says, bring up a child in the way it should grow, and when it's old, it won't depart from it. But the key part there is bringing him up. And if you look at Eli, the old man who ends up being fat and lazy and falls off the wall, breaks his neck, etc. A fitting way for a man to go who'd failed in one parental responsibility. Eli did not control his sons. He used his position as a prophet, as someone who seems to have faithfully taught what God said, but not to teach his sons or to control them. Right now, the most famous person to come from Eli's control is Samuel. Remember Hannah? She gave Samuel to Eli to bring up, and Samuel was a wonderful prophet. But almost nobody asked me, what about Samuel's sons? Well, Samuel was brought up by a man who never controlled his sons. Samuel didn't control his sons. And when you look at the end result of this, Samuel is the last of the prophets. And you guys out there, particularly, your responsibility as head of the house. I know that sounds anti-feminist. I know that's not popular, but it is God's way. He is the head of the house, not she, right? He is the head of the house, and he cares for his children, and he's given the scriptures to teach you how to grow up, how to go, and he demands you walk in them if you want to find his blessing. Eli didn't do that. Therefore, Samuel, who was brought up with these ungodly sons, he didn't do that either. And the end result is God, they basically abandoned the prophet system, the theonomy of Israel, which was a wonderful system, really, because you didn't have taxes, you didn't have all of these things. Your kids weren't conscripted for the military. By swapping over to Saul, that's what began to happen. So look at it in the big context. And you fathers, you sons out there who will be fathers, God gives you an awesome obligation, and that is the peace of the next generation. That is the godliness of the next generation. Fail there, and the nation fails. You don't have a godly nation if you don't have godly families. That's the point that's being largely missed, no matter what you think the sons of Belial means. But you saw the same problem with Noah. Noah had 3 sons, and only one of them chose to follow the God of his fathers. 2 of them, well, one of them was a real rebel, that's Ham, and the other was a less of a rebel, but not a believer to start. But obviously one who God prophesied or promised that he would dwell in the tents of Shem. So when you look at that in evangelism, don't be surprised that the gospel reached first of all best into the tents of the descendants of Japheth. Right? You can't avoid that. That's what happened. Now it's up to you guys to go and bring the peace of Israel over to the Middle East and dwell with the tents of Ham and all of those things and share the gospel with them there. So keep it in the big picture, not just the little unbelieving children, because every generation will have those, sadly, because you can't inherit faith. Right? Faith is a gift of God, not a gift of the parents. You must keep that in mind. Anybody else?
Good point. Stuff. All right. Have you got your slides up yet, Sam?
I do.
Or shall
Yes.
we go
I had a little bit of a panic, but it's all fine now.
That's fine. Back to you, man.
All right. So I'll share my screen and I'll show you this here. So if I share this here, and if we go into here, and then full screen, there we go. Right. Okay. So as many of you will undoubtedly know, you will probably have seen our many thumbnails on our YouTube channel, all of which have been designed by yours truly and put up to sort of hopefully entice you to watch our content, as we do hope you do every week. We know we have our regulars, but I want to give you a little bit of a sneak preview of something here. So this is something I've been working on this week whilst I've had some time off, yes, this is going to be basically a rehaul of our designs for our premium documentaries in terms of their artwork, and there's a reason why, but we're not going to go too much into that detail yet. So let me just click onto here, and then we can. So this is a little bit of a sneak preview there, so this is our most recent debate that I've designed the thumbnail for. It's a really great debate, really is, and I recommend you check that out. It's on our YouTube channel. But here's some of the the thumbnails we've been designing. So we've got the Darwin trilogy, we've got Fire and Ice, we've got Dinosaurs, the rest of the tale, Demolishing Dawkins and Darwin, Origin of the Races, Flood or Folly. I like that one because it's got dinosaurs in it. We've got Did a Good God Make Bad Bugs? Recognizing Creation Part 1, 2, and 3. Allah or Christ, The History of Man. So we just sort of flipped through these. I really do like that one as well, but Monkeys Don't Cry. I thought that was quite funny as well, that little design choice of the Down Under with Andy McIntosh. But yeah, we've got a whole bunch of thumbnails available for you to have a quick sneak peek at. And this one is one that I'm most appreciative of.
I do like that one.
Appreciative of my time for. This logo here took me about 3.5 hours to make. 3.5 hours to make. I had to do everything by hand, and it was all very very sort of stress inducing, but I'm glad it sort of came out in the end. But I'll stop sharing my screen now because we don't want to give too much away. Get rid of that. There we go. So there we go.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of them and future plans as well. So do keep an eye out as we look to sort of revamp the media side of things. So great stuff. It's just actually, there's an interesting question, sort of, well, it's more of a statement than a question, but it's actually something that I know we've dealt with quite a lot before, John. I just stick this up and maybe make a quick comment on that, about the idea that Jehovah as a name is unbiblical. We've discussed this quite a few times to do with the letter J and the like. So I didn't know if you just wanted to have a quick comment on that, because I know you have a really good Bible study on the letter J.
Yeah, so if you look at, say, the first copy of King James, James is spelt with an I, right? And you and I would say King James, but that's the way history goes, because J hadn't yet got its J sound, and so these letters, the J still has a Y sound in Spanish, an I sound in some languages, and a J sound in English. So when you change the printing from a straight I down to the one with the little curly at the bottom, we tend to think, well, this is Jesus and James. Well, you go for it, you'll understand it. And the same problem exists. And I'm pretty sure Sam can give you the reference if he puts it up on the video. We did a whole teaching on that. When you look at the 4 letters, the Tetragrammaton, that the King James Bible wisely uses the word capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D in respect of the Jewish philosophy. They would not say that name. They went one step too far, because it said, you will not blaspheme the name of the Lord, you will not use the name of God unworthily. So they didn't use it at all, right? So they then created another problem. They really forgot how to say it, right, as do many people in the West. So when you see those 4 letters, the JWHW, is the J pronounced as a I or a Y, as in Yahweh? But up to the 1900s, most people in the West pronounced it J. Now, you can say Jehovah is unbiblical if you like, or Yahweh is more biblical. These are questions of pronunciation. And I'm absolutely sure when you talk to Jesus, he understands if you pray in the name of Jesus, right? You are a victim of your own alphabet and the construction of the letters, and he's way more tolerant than most of us are with each other. Any more comments you want to make, Joe?
No, that's good. I think we did a whole program on Creation Conversations a little while back on the letter J, and it's a fascinating study to go through. I think we've done it a couple of times as well, actually. But anyway, great
we
stuff.
We have a question on the Ask site about it as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Shall we show Craig's video as Craig isn't here?
Yes. I've done some editing to it in well, sort of in my Sam special, as it is, before the straightforward.
This is in lieu of Craig being here.
Yes.
We've got about 10 minutes left or so we've got enough time for Craig's video and then maybe a question.
Yeah, perfect. I'll just play that now.
Where we're heading, it's the Great Western Tiers, Bluff on the far left. That's where we're heading. Try and find some fossils today. So this is Conneville, the property we're coming to in northern Tasmania. Beautiful grazing property, cropping property, and set at the base of the Great Western Tiers here in Tasmania. Over to my right, Miller's Bluff, where we're heading, and we're hoping to find some fossils up in there. This Great Western Tiers all the way along here is full of sedimentary rock. It's full of fossils. So, if you want to look over down this part, actually, I was in charge of logging all this.
Creation wombat to dig him out of the hole for us.
That would make a nice, a comical one.
Yeah.
Like, just go.
We did actually find a fossil dug out by this wombat for us, so there's his hole. Yep. And that's the hint.
Exhibit A.
Exhibit A, shell imprint. He's dug out for it. Here's our successful fossil hunters. What have we got there?
The moon?
There we go. Yep.
He's not liking it. So put your tail back down. There.
Tasmanian scorpions.
Funny.
Oh, when they made the road.
I thought. Just pull yourself up, man. Use your muscles.
Very good. Good stuff. Like it. And so that'll be up on YouTube as well, I'm assuming, Sam, in the next little while.
Yeah, we'll upload that on YouTube. And I think I speak for all of us when we need to pay tribute and give honours to the wombat for being an honorary member of Creation Research and finding that fossil.
I've got a safety warning from that, Sam, and that's the scorpions at the end with their little stings. These are much more common down under than most people think, particularly down under your bottom. And I know that because you see, I also suspect that scorpions don't have a really good sense of smell, because my mother always used to warn us that when we were going to the little outhouse, we all grew up with outhouses here, no septic, no sewage, no nothing, right? And you'd be warned to check when you lifted the wooden lid and there was the bin of last week's emptyings out of your intestines sitting there feverishly boiling away. There would often be scorpions, no spiders, but plenty of scorpions. I don't think they can smell anything. We used to call the little outhouse dunnies because, Dad would go in there and you'd ask what he was doing and he'd done his business. So a nice, interesting word in the Australian vocabulary. I don't know what they got called in other countries, but you had to make sure no scorpions. We have scorpions at Jurassic Ark, and we warn people about them when they come up there. Scorpions, tiger snakes, the lot. but mostly they are more afraid of us than we are afraid of them. So it's one of the, I mean, if you can imagine a scorpion this big, seeing John Mackay, the creation guy, towering over him hundreds of feet high, in his opinion, I'd hide as well. So, but when you put your bottom on a seat, be careful.
Well, yeah, the big black ones they're not too bad. I've been stung by big black scorpions enough times. It's the very little ones that you want to be worried about.
The ones like Craig was showing, yes.
Well, they're fairly big. I mean, the ones with big, if they have big chunky claws, then that's their main thing. So it's the ones which have really thin little claws, and they're usually yellow. Big black ones don't tend to be, well, bee sting kind of thing. Anyway, let's have about 5 minutes, Sam. Let's have one more question before we close up.
All right then. Let's do Sandy C, because Sandy gave me a compliment saying I was funny, so I like Sandy now. Question for the panel: evolutionists say that equilibrium between deleterious and beneficial mutations means that genetic entropy is false. Are they right?
That's
They're deluded. If they think there's any kind of equilibrium between mutations that delete information and ones that produce a benefit, it doesn't exist. And maybe Diane's a better person to delve into it. But as far as I'm aware, the only ever beneficial mutations have purely been circumstantial.
Yes.
Diane?
yes. There are various claims for beneficial or enhancing mutations, but in fact there aren't any. No one's actually found one. But deletions, they're well documented, and in fact the genome revolution has been an absolute boon for creationists, because it's shown us how much deletion there is and how much genetic loss there is. So there's plenty of genetic loss, but no increase in information, in new information, and there's certainly no beneficial mutations. Every claim to one has later been shown to be at best just neutral variation, but a lot of them are just a case of where one disease has clashed with another disease, but no beneficial mutations. And even now the secular scientists are starting to accept that. They still believe in evolution, though. Yeah. They just put it into the millions of years.
The stupidity in that question, sadly, I have to use that word, is that you don't ask where does the beneficial stuff come from, because until you have beneficial stuff, you can't have deleterious stuff. So therefore, again, you get back to the point John Sanders and some of the others made. You have to start off up there, and then you get genetic entropy downhill only if you start out at a point of perfection. Things can degenerate, lose information, but you must ask the question, where did the information come from that runs the body like this? And you have to say, oh Lord, you are mighty. We are made originally in your image. We may have sinned and lost that image. We need to be remade in your likeness through the grace of Jesus Christ alone.
I like the quote from Nobel Prize winning mutation expert. I think it's probably pronounced H. Miller, but it's spelled Mueller. He said the good ones are so rare that we consider them all bad. So there essentially are no beneficial mutations, according to him.
And even ones that could be argued as beneficial are still a loss of information. They're still deleting something. Case in point, the example we use a lot is that very windy island in the North Atlantic, where there's the only beetles that are thriving on it are ones that have lost the ability to have wings. And it's not because that they've evolved to live on the island. It's because they don't have wings, because they've mutated, they've lost the information to have wings. They're the only beetles able to survive there because all the other ones have been blown off. So it's like you could argue that is a beneficial mutation, but the reality is it's still a deletion of information, and it's only circumstantial that it's been beneficial to them. Anywhere else, they'd be at a disadvantage. But anyway, it's about time that we wrap things up.
Well, just one thing to add to it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you guys touch on genetic entropy in the is the evolutionary science reliable debate?
I believe we did, yes.
So there we go. Another plug for.
I think it's also dealt with in the Darwin's Evolution, a very unnatural
Yes.
selection. So go and check both of those out. The debate is now obviously free to watch on YouTube, so go check that out. And Darwin's Evolution is available to stream and to be purchased from the UK as a DVD anyway, or as an MP4 from Creation Research Online. All right, it's time to finish up, folks. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Thank you for a very lively chat tonight, which has been wonderful, and for all the questions that have come through. And we will continue to keep hold of your questions and continue to answer them as we go through. And we will have another Q&A session in a few weeks' time. But join us next week as we have another Creation Conversations, and we will see you then. God bless, folks.